Great. We are back this afternoon on Monday, December 11th, in the matter of John Grismore, the Special Committee on Impeachment Inquiry. And we'd like to invite Mr. Grismore and his attorney, Robert Kaplan, witness chairs. And before we start, we're just going to do some introductions, and then I will swear the witness in, and then Representative Dolan is going to do some of the initial questioning. My name's Martin Lalone. I'm a representative from South Burlington. I chair the House Judiciary Committee, and I'm the chair of the Special Committee on Impeachment Inquiry.
I'm Mike McCarthy. I represent the city of St. Albans. I chair the House Government Operations and Military Affairs Committee, and I'm the vice chair of the Special Committee.
Karen Dolan, representative from Essex Junction, and I'm House Judiciary. Kelly Carwalla, I represent Londonderry, Andover, Winhall, and Weston. I sit on Human Services, and I'm the current chair of the House Discrimination Prevention Panel.
Representative Byron, represent Northwest Addison County, reside in Virginia, and I serve as the House Vice Chair of Government Operations and Military Affairs. And I'm Tim Doherty.
One second, I'll get to it in 1 second. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Well, welcome, guys, for coming. Thank you for coming to our hearing this afternoon. I'm Carolyn Brannigan. I'm going to be, I guess, behind you on that screen. I'm in my home in Georgia. I represent the towns of Georgia and Fairfax in the Vermont House of Representatives. And when we were in session, I serve on the Ways and Means Committee. So again, thank you for coming to our hearing.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Tom Burdett. I represent West Rutland, Clarendon, Wallingford, and Rutland Town, and I'm the vice chair of House Judiciary.
Yeah, please.
And I'm Tim Doherty. I'm a lawyer at Downs, Racklin, and Martin, and I've been hired by the special committee to help them with this matter.
And we also have a couple of our legislative counsel here as well. If you could introduce yourselves.
Sure. Jennifer Carvey, Director and Chief Counsel of the Office of Legislative Counsel.
Michael O'Grady, Deputy Director, Office of Legislative Counsel.
Great, thank you very much. So if you could raise your right hand, Mr. Grismore. Do you solemnly affirm that the evidence you shall give relative to the cause under consideration shall be the whole truth and nothing but the truth under the penalties and pains of perjury?
I do.
Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Representative Dolan.
Well, I think just as a point of order, in every congressional hearing that I've seen, the witnesses offered an opportunity before their testimony to make opening remarks. Chair Grismore has some opening remarks for the committee today.
I will let Mr. Grismore give his opening remarks. That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am John Grismore. I am the lawfully elected sheriff for Franklin County, Vermont. I am the person that the citizens of Franklin County chose to be their sheriff and the person that those citizens want to continue as sheriff. The responsibilities that have been bestowed upon me by the citizens of Franklin County are sacred and humbling, and I will not abandon those who have asked me to serve to ease my personal burden or to appease outsiders. I am grateful and blessed for the continual outpouring support I receive from the citizens of Franklin County, and they inspire me to persevere in the face of adversity. I'm not here today in response to your subpoena. I'm here because this is the first opportunity that I have been given to stand up for myself, for the good men and women of law enforcement in Vermont, and for all citizens of Vermont who want to be safe in their homes, safe on the streets, and safe from being victimized by crime. I'm here to speak the truth to you because I am unbowed and unafraid to say what needs to be said. I am an elected sheriff, but I am also every beat cop in this state. Make no mistake. Every police officer in this state who puts on a badge and a gun to serve the public knows that I am him or her. The outrage and scorn that have been directed at me, the persecution, the witch hunts that I have suffered could happen to any police officer required to confront or arrest a non-compliant person. Police work is messy, often fast and occasionally violent. Police officers are not bullies or sadists who take pleasure in hurting people. Police officers are well-intentioned, dedicated people who accept the duty to use the power of the state to keep themselves, their co-workers, and the public safe from harm. Policing is a hard job. There's no perfect way to do it, but it must be done, and done so without hesitation. Every day, police officers have to do things that will look aggressive on video and those who are not experienced in the realities of police work. Police officers need to support their agencies and the institutions of government to remain a viable defense against chaos. When police agencies and the institutions of government turn their backs on police officers or throw officers under the bus when it's politically expedient, police officers flee their positions in droves or refuse to do what their jobs require of them. Social order quickly breaks down, and without adequate and effective policing. The evidence of this is all around us. Vermont is literally on fire. There's no corner or rural hamlet within our state so remote that it has not been touched by inner city violence, rampant drug addiction, skyrocketing property crimes, and homelessness. My hometown of St. Albans has experienced types of crimes and violence like never before. Burlington is unrecognizable from the vibrant city it was only a few years ago and is in danger of becoming a hollowed out shell, desperate like many Americans' dying small cities. Vermont tourist-driven economy is under the direct threat from Vermont fading image as a safe, picturesque, and vacation destination. The speed at which this transformation has come about is stunning, and the pace of deterioration continues to escalate. We are at a tipping point, and an immediate pivot to the support of law enforcement is essential. The drastic and sudden deterioration in our society has one single primary cause. We have allowed the media outrage machine to drive our policies and decision-making. Political leaders and decision makers have wilted under pressure of the mob, which has been whipped into a frenzy by media lie after lie. Among those most socially corrosive lies from the media has been a lie that all police officers are bullies and racists. The media-driven anti-police movement that gained steam after 2014 and reached tsunami proportions in the last few years has carved out the ranks of police departments and crushed the spirit of many police officers who remain. Police officers simply cannot be effective if they are forced to always look over their shoulder, wondering if they'll be the next victim to be fed to the mob. I simply am the latest victim of the media outrage machine, coupled with the ambitions of opportunistic politicians and weak-willed leaders to face the whipping block. The media has seized on 15 seconds of video played on an endless loop to excoriate me in the pursuit of clicks and eyeballs. Instead of supporting me in what they know is right, the law enforcement leadership class has thrown me into the volcano, hoping that the horde will be sustained by my sacrifice. Certain politicians have cynically seized on the controversy of my actions to attempt to gain notoriety for themselves. This is a disgrace to all those who are party to it. It is also corrosive and utterly tone deaf to the message it sends to the men and women who still wear a uniform and act as police officers. The whirlwind of hardship has fallen upon me for using reasonable, necessary, and appropriate force to quickly achieve compliance from a dangerous, violent, out of control person, reverberates through the ranks and file of police officers of this state. I know this because countless police officers have reached out to me to offer support or to share their fears about becoming the victim of the mob mentality that has engulfed me. What you're doing to me, what has already been done to me, is enormously damaging to the future of law enforcement in this state. There has never been a time in the history of Vermont that our quality of life, security, and prosperity depend more on the willingness and morale of law enforcement. In the face of this, certain members of this body appear determined to continue the surge along the path that has brought us to this point. Against this backdrop, I am here within the most irregular of prosecutions, impeachment by a co-equal branch of government. Impeachment has been considered so extreme in Vermont's history that it's only been attempted twice before. The current political class in this building seems to have such disdain for history or tradition as to think nothing of tossing away 232 years of legacy in order to pursue seriously weak claims against me in an unprecedented process. This change's political temperature is perfectly in step with the political and legal attacks on the National Democratic Party, which is brought to bear against their Republican rivals. Seemingly, I am the new face of the successful Republican candidate who refuses to step aside for a Democrat. The media relentlessly beats their fear drum of anti-democratic, autocratic, and dictatorship. There is nothing more anti-democratic and autocratic than the effort in this room to override the votes of 8,900 Franklin County residents and replace those votes with the backroom fancy of a handful of political insiders in Montpelier. This spits in the face of representative government. Perhaps even more shocking than discarding of hundreds of years of tradition and the disregard for the results of free and fair elections, this committee's ever-widening scope of its investigation into me This committee has risen from the hubris of certain legislators who are unhappy that the voters of Franklin County chose me as sheriff, despite the media campaign leveled against me. These legislators, who seemingly feel their judgment is superior to the will of Franklin County electorate, seek any reason to justify my ouster. Every aspect of my life, personal and professional, is being scrutinized in a desperate hope that valid cause for this unprecedented and frankly un-American undertaking will be uncovered. The people of Vermont know this, and this is not how we do things. I am ready to answer your questions because I'm unbowed, unafraid, and I have nothing about which to have fear or shame. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Dolan.
Thank you for the statement. So just confirming, you understand that you are under oath and obligated to tell the truth, just as you would be in a court of law. And if you don't understand any question that I ask you, please ask me to repeat the question. And if you need a break at any time, let me know. So to start with, can you state and spell your name?
Yep. Sheriff John Grismore, JOHN GRISMORE.
Great. Thank you for that. I forget if this was covered when we did introductions, but you have somebody with you today. Can you just confirm who that is and their role for you?
This is Robert Kaplan. He's my attorney.
Okay, great. And are you currently the Franklin County Sheriff?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
And when did you take that office?
This February 1st.
Thank you. And how long have you worked at the Franklin County Sheriff's Office?
I had two different stints. So I worked for approximately 5 years back in the early to mid 2000s. And then I worked most recently for about 3.5 years. And then back again for my third stint when I was elected sheriff.
Thank you for that. So that was your time at the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. Can you describe your previous work history in law enforcement in general?
Sure, like when I started.
Yeah, I mean,
Sure.
I mean, we don't need to have full details of it, but if you can give an overview.
Sure. So I first became certified in 1997. So my first stint was with Vermont State Police as an auxiliary trooper. That was a kind of a part-time arrangement as I was just starting out on a career in law enforcement. I transitioned from, that was more of a seasonal job. So it was more of like boat marine patrol in the summer and snowmobile patrols in the winter. So that in between those seasons, I actually started working for the Swanton Village Police Department. Worked for them for a while, then kind of went back to the state police and then joined with the sheriff's office and you know that part so far.
Thank you for sharing that. So since becoming sheriff, we just have a kind of this list of duties.
Yep.
Curious which duties you have performed for the Franklin County Sheriff's Office, again, as sheriff. Have you participated in patrols?
I have.
Okay. Have you participated in investigations?
Some, yes.
Okay. And have you provided training to deputies?
Personally, I have not provided training, no.
Okay. And have you evaluated recruits?
I have.
Okay. And have you reviewed use of force reports?
I have.
Have you disciplined deputies who violated policies?
I have.
And then I'm thinking about the office in general. How would you describe the environment in the Franklin County Sheriff's Office since you were elected sheriff?
In terms of morale or culture, what specifically?
I think all of it would be great.
Sure. I think that culture has been always been positive and morale has been, despite everything that's been going on, has been very positive as well.
So since your election in November of 22, how much of the staff has turned over in the Franklin County?
There was a few that left initially on before I took over office, right? Because there's a period of time from when you're elected till you actually assume responsibilities in the office. So there were a few that had left. We've gotten that many back in other, with new candidates, new interests.
Okay. And for those folks that did leave, what were the reasons that those deputies gave for leaving the office?
So I've only spoken to two of them that left. Two of them were incentivized by other departments.
Okay.
Yep.
And so exit interviews or checking in with folks when they leave, that's not a standard part of the process?
It's not a standard part, no.
Okay. So how many officers or deputies do you currently have on staff?
So as you probably heard testimony earlier today, the sheriff's organizations are comprised of a number of different personnel in a number of different capacities. So we have a patrol unit that provides the policing services that people are most comfortable with understanding. We also have like a civil unit. We have court units as well. So do you want the total of all those people or?
Yes, that would be
So
great.
there's 28 total people.
Okay. And how many of those officers were employed by the Franklin County Sheriff's Office prior to November?
I don't know exactly how many there were, but again, that number of 28 has been pretty consistent throughout time.
Okay.
I could get you specifics. I just don't have that data in front of me.
Okay, so those 28, I think that we're trying to see like the turnover, right, or the change. Would you say half of them,
No,
three quarters?
no, only a few. We only lost a couple of folks up front. And again, we've gained those positions back since my taking office.
Okay. So another question is in April of 2023, several Franklin County legislators attended a meeting with town of Enosburg officials.
Okay.
In which they expressed concern and frustration over a lack of coverage under the contract they have in your office.
Okay.
While making regular payments for that coverage. Could you tell us what the cause for that lapse in coverage was?
First of all, that's inaccurate.
Okay.
Okay, since I've been sheriff, we have never done anything but bill for services rendered. So previously, under the previous sheriff, that had been the practice to pre-bill for a month in advance. So they would say, look, if it was 40 hours a week, times however many weeks in a month, there was a pre-billing arrangement that was done. I don't do business that way. So I created a new model that is a bill for services rendered. So that statement's unfortunately not correct.
Okay. And can I appreciate clarifying it, because I feel like that's an important piece of this process. How was that communicated to the town?
So when taking over, within a couple of months, I have gone in front of all the select boards that we have partnerships with for policing services. And I explained all of this to them. So one of the challenges that we have that is very much like every other law enforcement entity is staffing, right? There hasn't been a dramatic changeover in terms of quantity of personnel that I have, but that number could always be more. So one of the things that sheriff's organizations are unique in that would be different than a municipality, for example, that is chartered to have 30 positions, let's just say. Our ability to perform contracts has a growth and decline based on how many people we have. So if we are trying to target a 40-hour week, if I don't have people to fill the 40 hours, it might go below that 40 hours. So it's kind of like this growing, expanding model that's not set in stone in a specific like a municipality might have.
Okay, so it seems like, although there wasn't the billing piece of it, there might be disagreement about that piece of it. Can we kind of focus on the piece of what was the lapse of coverage? Like, it sounds like they were saying there was lack of coverage. So curious to hear from you what the cause of the lack of coverage was.
So prior to me becoming the sheriff, let me use that because it's important. That historical reference is important. Prior to me becoming sheriff, towns that we had contracts with historically, Sheldon, Enosburg, as you noted, Richford, Fairfax, those are some of the core counties, the core towns that we partnered with. Resources were pulled. This is, again, prior to me becoming sheriff. Resources were pulled from those counties, those towns, and applied towards St. Albans town, which was a much bigger contract and a 24/7 contract. So under the previous sheriff, those towns were neglected. They were getting nothing, almost nothing. So where we had made arrangements to buy contracts. So something else to keep in mind that these contracts have been a 3-year contract. So these were established before I was the sheriff. So what had happened when I became sheriff was I met with all of these towns and explained to them in great detail. And I've had numbers of meetings. I've attended numbers of select board meetings. I've talked with a number of citizens. And I had explained that due to staffing limitations, we weren't able to commit a 40-hour, under the 40-hour contract that had been written previous. So with those conversations, one of the things that we discussed was this bill for services model rather than a pre-billing model. So what I decided to do was that wasn't fair to rob these other towns. It wasn't appropriate to rob these other towns that we had and I say we, going back to when I was a first deputy, even before then, these relationships had been established with these towns to provide this customizable police services. Those towns have been neglected. When I took over, I said, we're not doing that anymore. We are going to now go back into these communities and we might not be able to do 40 hours, but we're going to do some hours. That might be 16 hours. It might be 32 hours. But that was my decision to reallocate those resources more fairly across the county rather than putting all of our eggs in the St. Albans town basket, which had been done under the previous administration.
So were new contracts drawn up then?
We have had 2 new contracts since I've been there, yes.
Okay, and when were the new contracts?
Don't have those specifics in front of me, but we signed contracts with the town of Franklin and with the town of Sheldon since me being here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe you've kind of addressed this a bit. You said you spoke to the select board, but how did you resolve the issue with the town of Enosburg specifically?
I just met with them. So I had another follow-up meeting with them in the last couple of weeks. And we've got into this challenge of staffing and had those conversations with them as well, so that they could have a better opportunity to understand the challenges that we have, and also to further the discussion about the model of redistributing those services more evenly across those partnerships that we had had. Because again, as I stated before, that had not existed.
And I guess just trying to understand this. So they had a contract. It was, I think you said it was established before you started as sheriff, but it was a 3-year contract. You weren't able, I think you as the department weren't able to fully staff the contract, and so proposed a new idea, but it sounds like they didn't necessarily agree to that at the time.
Contractually, they haven't agreed to it, correct?
Okay.
So St. Albans Town agreed to a change in their contract. Fairfax agreed to a change in the contract. Richford and Enosburg did not agree to that change.
Okay.
So in practice, that was existent, but on paper, it was different.
Okay, so you had a contract that said certain number of hours for Enosburg, but that wasn't being fulfilled.
Correct. It wasn't being fulfilled at all before. And so when I took over, we've now started to get back in more and more. So again, it wasn't 40 hours, but maybe it was 32 hours, or maybe it was 16 hours, again, depending upon the week.
Okay. How many town contracts does the Franklin County Sheriff's Office currently have?
That's why, you want me to recap them again?
Yes, that'd be great.
Yeah, no problem. So
New information, so,
Yeah. So Fairfax,
okay,
Enosburg,
great.
Richford. And again, in St. Albans Town,
Yeah.
which that contract is expiring and as of June 30th. We had previously established contracts with, or as I noted, since I took over, with Sheldon and with Franklin.
Okay.
So those are the core patrol contracts. There's a lot of other contracts that just through the natural cycle have gotten renewed, or contracts, other different partnerships that we have to provide security services at different locations, different entities, dairy days, things like that.
Those are the municipalities specifically.
Correct, municipality specific, yeah.
So we talked about the Enosburg one. With these current contracts that you have you been able to provide sufficient staffing to serve those that you have current contracts with?
What would be your definition of sufficient?
Whatever the contract is that you have with them.
Correct. So the new contracts that we established dictate a target, not a requirement, a target, so that we will try to do 40 hours a week to the best of our ability. Again, with staffing challenges and military leave and people having, going on a maternity or paternity leave, that's always a constant model. And I believe you heard one of the previous sheriffs discuss the very challenging aspects that there are about staffing under this, under this environment. So we have those same challenges that everybody has.
And it sounds like the new policy only bills for the hours that you serve them.
That is correct. Yep. And as an example, in the previous administration, what had been happening was towns weren't communicated. That wasn't communicated to towns. So they were under the expectation that they were getting 40 hours a week, and they weren't. So at the end of the year, refunds were issued, and towns had no idea what these refunds were. And they're, $20,000 or more that they were getting back because there was not the ability to bill for services that weren't rendered. So I wanted a higher level of transparency. I wanted a better partnership and a better expectation of how those services could realistically be provided and fairly provided and truthfully provided. So that's why when I took over, we changed that model to a bill for services rendered. So if we're supposed to, if our target is 40 hours and we only work 32, we bill for 32.
So I guess for the town, because it sounds like maybe you still have some of those older contracts that are still in play and are finding their time.
That's correct. They all have the same cycle, and that cycle is under review right now. So we're now proposing new contracts for these towns in the next years. Everything as of June 30th all has about the same expiration date.
So you're expecting to do some, refunds for any contracts that you didn't?
Again, my model is different than the previous sheriff. I'm telling you about the previous sheriff model was refunding.
Okay.
We don't do that. We only bill for services rendered.
Okay.
So in that process, just so you understand it better, we will show them how many, who worked what hours, how many hours were worked, and then we'll bill on that number.
Yeah. And I apologize. I'm just really trying to understand it. But it sounds
It's
like
very complicated.
yeah,
Yes.
you were working under contracts that were already in play without your new design.
Correct.
And so those have to finish out or had to finish out. So I'm assuming there's refunds that, if you didn't serve fully, the time commitment for those, there would be refunds that need to go out.
Right, because in the length of that contract, so it's my understanding that at the end of the previous sheriff's term and in years previous, again, I don't have those numbers, so I can't give you the specifics, refunds were issued.
Okay.
So between when, January 1st and when I took over, there were some refunds that as I remember, but we reconciled everything.
Okay.
Yeah, so when I started, everything was clean.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you for that. So I think we kind of covered that. So maybe it's worth just following up. I feel like I know the answer is that the town of Enosburg asserted that they hadn't seen a Franklin County officer or deputy in their town for months, except for the student resource officer prior to contacting your office in March. Is that correct?
I'm not sure what they said.
Okay. Do you know if there were officers other than the school resource
There
officer
absolutely were.
that were serving in that time?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So when this came to you, this was a surprise then, if they did say this?
So we, from time to time, again, I'm not sure who said what and how it was said, but there have been concerns that we don't see a police officer from time to time. That's traditional feedback that we get. When that happens, we have data in our cruiser so that we can go back in and look at GPS locations to find out where they're at, get a better understanding of where they might be. Some people that might travel on, I'll use Fairfax as an example. 104 is kind of the main road, right? Main Street in Fairfax. So if we're monitoring traffic there, we might be sitting there, but somebody on the back roads might never see us or might not see us as often because we're in a certain area for certain reasons. The converse could be true as well. So they might not see us on Main Street, but we might be patrolling another part of the town, right? They're very rural, very large towns to cover, lots of roads. And when you have one deputy assigned to that area, it's certainly very possible that people don't see us or don't believe we're there. And it's something that we've had to address historically. And again, going way back to when I was first deputy. Yeah.
Okay, so you feel like you're able to document that there were officers there during those times?
Absolutely. Yep.
My understanding is Enosburg was billed or paid for those hours.
That's not accurate.
They weren't paid for
That's
those
not accurate.
hours.
Since I've been the sheriff, we have not billed for services that we haven't provided.
Okay. So I think that covers it for the topics that I'm going to cover. So I'll hand it back.
Right.
So Chairman.
Thank you. So yeah, I have some questions as well. So you are currently facing a charge of simple assault in response to the August 7th, 2022 incident involving Jeremy Burrows, who was detained and shackled at the time. So after that incident and when you came back to the office as sheriff, how did you describe that incident to the deputies and other staff under your command?
I'm sorry, so you're asking about the timing of my communications with deputies?
So yeah, when you became sheriff, how did you describe the August 7th incident with respect to Jeremy Burrows?
We've had lots of communications about it. I don't remember any specific dialogue. I know that in the time frame when I became elected and then the time that I took office, we actually, at the request of the deputies, had a meeting, like an offsite meeting to talk through various different things to understand what their feelings were, what my perspective was, to have a good dialogue about that, because certainly I was very concerned that they might have an opinion or they might be afraid to voice an opinion that they might have. The benefit that I have, Mr. Chair, was that I was there for a number of years before. So they all got to know me. They know who I am as a leader. I was the number 2 in that position for a while. So they knew my character. They knew what I stood for. They had all of this information. So I think what I had heard from them was that they were concerned that I was going to take vengeance on them for what had happened. And I wanted to make sure that I had the opportunity to put that to rest. And that was not the case at all. So as an example, some people were concerned that I might terminate them. That I was I think the term that was used, that I was going to come in with a heavy sword. And I wanted to reassure them and take that opportunity that was absolutely not the case. The benefit that I had of being in a leadership role in that organization previously was I also knew who they were. I know what their character was like. So there was no concern that I had about their capabilities or anything. Certainly when something like this happens and there's a lot of media attention around it, and certainly as I experienced, that wasn't a complete picture, right? And we all saw the video that was 15 seconds, a 2-hour video was cut down to, the most damning part of that, part of that interaction. And so I wanted to have them understand that there was an opportunity to learn about all of the facts and circumstances. So I can't answer that specifically as to one particular conversation. There's been many. I will share with you, though, that from then and throughout this entire process, I continue to get notes and messages of support from all of my folks. So that's a constant theme that I've had.
So you, as part of whatever those conversations were, I want to make sure I understood. So you did explain or defend what occurred in that incident as an appropriate use of force from your perspective.
I don't remember that. I didn't use those words. So I don't remember exactly the dialogue that took place.
But you defended that.
I don't remember, quote unquote, defending my position on that.
Or explained it?
We had a conversation about it. Again, you're talking about, several months ago, and I just don't remember the specifics of those conversations and of the many conversations that I've had.
And that was, you mentioned a meeting with deputies. I assume deputies and staff, was that like in the January timeframe, a little bit before you?
Around there, I'm not sure exactly, but certainly before I had been sworn in, if you will.
And what is the Franklin County Sheriff's Office procedure or policy when a deputy or other staff member is under investigation for criminal conduct or professional misconduct?
What do you mean specifically? Do we have a policy that talks about that?
Yeah, what's the procedure with an individual that's under such an investigation?
Sure. So previous to me becoming sheriff, the policy was convoluted at best. It was not a substantial policy that provides a comprehensive action plan for when these things happen. One of the things that I did is to enact a new policy, or which it's not a new as in I penned it. It was really adopting the Vermont State Police policy. They have a very comprehensive policy about how internal investigations are conducted and steps that are taken when there's complaints against conduct or anything else. So we enacted that policy because, again, one hadn't previously existed.
And does that policy provide that an individual would no longer be responsible for patrols or investigations, depending on what the misconduct was that was alleged?
I don't know specifically. I'd have to review that, and I'm certainly happy to do that and get back to you. I'd have to review that policy. It's quite a comprehensive policy, and I don't remember all the bits and pieces.
Fair enough. And you haven't had access to Valcor, and I'm wondering how that has affected your ability to perform your duties as sheriff.
Very minimally. So, and as you heard from testimony this morning, the role that sheriffs play, which is not unlike any senior leadership position in law enforcement, 99% of what we do is administrative.
So did the roles shift at all when you no longer could access Valcor?
Did my role specifically shift?
Yeah, well, within the sheriff's office. I mean, did you have to adjust who was going to be responsible for different issues? And
no, so we already had that in place. So I have a chief deputy, I have a captain that is responsible for all of the functions underneath me. So that is the individual that would take the lead on reviewing any use of force. So when you asked me before, or you asked me before about the use of force, or somebody asked me, do I review those? I review them, but more of a second eyes. I have a very capable, very competent chief deputy that reviews all of those. That's one of his primary functions, is to address any issues that come from that patrol division, whether it's performance, whether it's discipline, whether it's use of force. And Valcor is a system that can track some of that use of force data.
And you mentioned earlier that you have been as sheriff on patrols. Has the not having access to Valcor, has that limited your ability to continue to be on patrols?
Previously, yes, it has. So
when you say previous, I want to make sure I understand.
Previous to losing Valcor.
Okay,
right?
so
before losing Valcor, I was able to do patrols. I have not done many patrols, maybe one or two, and only in very extreme circumstances where somebody's just unavailable. And so I would fill the shift so that we could honor a contract, right? Somebody calls out sick, there's nobody else. And rather than me force one of my folks in, I took the responsibility of coming out and doing a patrol function.
But after you no longer had access to Valcor?
I don't remember specifically. It's been a while since I haven't had Valcor.
But you haven't been on patrols?
Again, so I don't remember the timeline specifically as to when Valcor was lost and when when and if I did any patrol functions.
And how about investigations? Is that something that you've had to curtail once you didn't have access to Valcor?
Yes, yep, it has. But again, I haven't participated in a number of investigations previously. I have a very competent staff that conducts investigative work. My role isn't to conduct investigations.
And how did you ensure that your deputies understood the limitations that you were put under by not having access to Valcor?
we put out communications around it. I think that was very public. It was very, that was made very public, and there were a number of communications, both internally and externally, about what that meant.
And I'm going to talk a little bit about use of force, and what kind of training have you received regarding use of force?
So I've attended requirements. There's, the Vermont Criminal Justice Council requires a certain amount of training every year, so I participated in the required training.
And what did you learn about de-escalation?
In those training, the use of force training that we have doesn't really focus on de-escalation. It's more of tactical applications of force, handcuffing, defense mechanisms, things of that nature. De-escalation is kind of its own component.
And what kind of training have you had with respect to de-escalation techniques?
Well, the example, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the program that I have created in our office, which is really one of a kind, and that's a crisis management team. So part of that team, a crisis response team, what that is, and I've talked about this publicly a number of times, I'll share that with you, but that is a specific team that leverages folks that already have an aptitude in that capacity, whether it's mental health, crisis awareness, things like that. And then we've bolstered that education with a number of specified trainings to make sure that people have that ability, that have a higher level of de-escalation ability, if you will, to be able to respond to the field in a very effective capacity.
Is that more when there's welfare check calls and those kind of things? Is that what that crisis unit is primarily for?
It's for anybody that could be experiencing a crisis. So it could be somebody that is, as an example, we responded to a young man that was autistic and was having a crisis based on his condition. So that team was very essential in de-escalating him, understanding what he needed and what we should do as a law enforcement response so that could be mitigated, appropriately dealt with. It's people that have been on the steps of court and have been having a mental breakdown about something that happened in court. So just as a couple of examples, there's hundreds of examples. I've participated personally in talking people out of shooting themselves. I've talked to an armed person that was held his family, his wife and daughter hostage. And I was able to negotiate him coming out. So that's kind of the things that team really focuses on, is a higher level of awareness and training to be able to respond. The example that I've used in history, when I've talked about this before, is think about your doctor's office. So you have your doctor, or the MD, that has a very sophisticated and understood level of knowledge and training, but they might not be the person you see all the time. The person that you might see all the time might be a nurse practitioner, or something of that nature. We built this team to kind of fulfill a similar role, that nurse practitioner. They're not the quote unquote expert, the all experienced person, but they would have a very high level of functional knowledge and ability to respond to a need that you might have. So in a case that would be beyond our capabilities, that's when we would bring in professional organizations like NCSS, if you will, to help help that situation. So our team was designed to be a kind of a first level, a quick reaction force to be able to respond to that.
So I assume you've read or reviewed the Criminal Justice Council's use of force policy. I'm just curious. Let me confirm that you have. Have you read the use of force policy of the Criminal Justice Council?
Yes, I have.
And that's been adopted by Franklin County. When? I'm just curious.
On a specific date, whenever it was rolled out. So we were in line with everybody else when that was. Yep.
So the crisis unit, is that in response to what's called Appendix D of that policy, which really deals with the folks who are in crisis? I just wondered if that's connected up to that, or if
I'd have to read the appendix. I don't know that verbatim off the top of my head.
That's not what necessarily prompted you to put that into place.
No, it's a team that I wanted to put in place for years and years and years. One of the other components of that team and this overall model, so it's really a 3-column model when we think about mental health, the general topics of mental health and as they apply to law enforcement. Number one, and not in order of significance, but the first thing is that crisis response team that I described. We recognize that there is a very big need for mental health expertise to respond to a situation quickly. There aren't enough mental health professionals in the roles of law enforcement to be able to respond to all of the needs. A lot of organizations have made tremendous strides of embedding mental health workers into their organizations. Our model was a little bit different. Well, one, we couldn't afford it, right? We couldn't afford to hire an expert to be with us all the time. So we wanted to take a different avenue and apply a broader level of skill sets across a number of different deputies that would have that quick reaction ability. So that's one. The second goal of this overall program was to elevate everybody's awareness in terms of mental health needs. For example, our court personnel. Nobody goes to court and has a good time doing it, right? The majority of folks that are going to court are experiencing some sort of negative emotional. They're going to file for divorce. They're going for a criminal hearing. It's child custody issues. So we wanted to make sure that all of the deputies that interact with the public had a much higher level than what had been traditionally out there. So we elevated that. The third thing was to really focus on our own mental health and to implement tools and services that were available to us as police officers to manage our own mental health needs.
And other than the incident involving Jeremy Burrows, have you ever had to use force beyond compliant handcuffs?
Less than a handful of times.
Can you explain what those situations were?
So there was over 26 years, it's hard to remember all of them. There's very, very few. It had been folks that we had been trying to take into custody and it required more force in doing so. So non-compliant cuffing. Somebody says no, they resist, they physically resist, they actively resist. You have to, bring them to a position where you can then forcefully put them in handcuffs.
So you've consistently stated that you do believe that you used appropriate force against Jeremy Burrows, who was handcuffed and shackled at the time. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement.
And do you continue to believe that?
I do.
And on December 6th, the Vermont Criminal Justice Council voted to find that you had used excessive force in that particular instance. And do you disagree then with its findings that your actions were in violation of Vermont's use of force statutes and policy?
Let me first say I do disagree with that. Secondly, I'm not exactly sure what they're citing was violated. They issued a very broad statement that the part of the policy, the entire policy, I'm not sure exactly what they've cited. I don't have that information yet, so I can't offer you a intelligent response on how they voted or what they used for materials or whatever.
And do you think it might be confusing to deputies under your command that have their head of agency who hires and evaluates them to have such a disagreement with that unanimous opinion of the Vermont Criminal Justice Council?
I couldn't speculate on what their feelings are. I can only tell you that a number of them have reached out in support since this has happened.
Yeah, and just noting that the Criminal Justice Council does have significant experienced law enforcement leaders there, agency heads, and chaired by the former Attorney General. But so without your certification, are you going to be able to participate in patrols?
Without my certification?
Right.
No.
How about in investigations?
No.
Evaluating uses of force?
Yes.
You can still be part of that without the cert.
To the capacity that I've always had, which is very minimal, yes.
Okay. In disciplining deputies who have violated policies?
Can I participate in that process?
Right, without.
In the capacity that I have always had, yes.
And what is the capacity that you've always had?
As I described earlier, I have a chief deputy that has one of his primary responsibilities is to take the lead on all of that. So he'll use that information, base it on the policies that we have at hand. And then if he needs to bounce some ideas off me or to have a dialogue about results, or, what would come of that investigation, then that's where I would still continue to have a participant role in that.
And, and also providing training to deputies. Is that something you'd be able to do without certification?
I'm not personally a trainer.
Are you going to have difficulties in recruiting deputies if you don't have certification? What's your view of how that's going to affect your ability to recruit?
I don't think it's going to have any ability. This has been a very public matter for over a year. The video has been viewed millions of times. And not only did I win the election after that was all public, I've had a record number of applicants since I took office.
How about retaining deputies?
I haven't had any issues retaining deputies. Matter of fact, Mr. Chair, I'll give you an example. We have brought back another individual that is a level 3 certified officer that has come back since then. And he has been very vocal about his support despite all of this.
And how will roles change in the office once you are decertified?
They won't change.
And how will you make sure that the staff understands the limitations that you have if one you end up not being certified as a law enforcement officer?
So all the folks that work in my organization are incredibly intelligent. They understand what it means to not be certified, but they also recognize that my patrol is a very tiny, tiny portion of what I had ever done. My job is 99% administrative anyway. So they all understand that. Yep. And we'll continue the dialogue. I have had communications with them since this happened, and we'll continue that dialogue as time progresses. We all are learning what this means, and something to keep in mind too is that my decertification at this point in time is temporary. I'm very confident that we're going to have an opportunity to appeal it, and based on that appeal, or whether it's through federal lawsuit, that will get overturned. So we need to keep in mind that this is a temporary thing at this point in time. It's not set in stone.
And do you think towns will be reluctant to contract with your office if you end up being decertified?
I don't think there's going to have any bearing on what the town's opinions are going to be. Again, they've known about this for a long time. They've known about all of these, the video, everything else for a long time. And I have had towns like Sheldon, like Franklin, come back to us for services and have not had any issues. I had a meeting with Enosburg, as I described earlier, and they've asked about what that new contract could look like. And they were thinking that they might want to go to 7 days instead of 5 days. So they wanted to make sure that any preparations that I had made in terms of a proposal would include a 5-day option and a 7-day option, because they were thinking they wanted us back for 7 days instead of 5 days. Right. So all of those towns have come back. Highgate came back to us and asked us to do a proposal for the next year as well, which we have submitted to them.
Do you have any concern about your personal liability going down the road if you're decertified and you're not able to keep up with the latest trainings and such, since, as we learned this morning from a couple of the other sheriffs, that, the sheriff is personally liable for their deputies?
So I'm not sure, like in terms of patrol function or in terms of.
Yeah, if something happens, if they've misused force, if they're being sued, you could be on the line as well as the sheriff of that office.
So we maintain a pretty expensive liability insurance policy to cover myself and everybody else in that office. So that wouldn't change.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn it over. We have some additional questions related to bookkeeping matters and some finance issues. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Doherty from Downs, Racklin and Mark. So over to you.
Thank you. And thank you, Sheriff. I have a series of questions for you about your role as the bookkeeper for the Franklin County Sheriff's Department under Sheriff Langevin.
Yep.
My understanding is that you were hired to be the bookkeeper for the department in 2019. Is that correct?
Correct.
And how did you come to get that role?
So I had a lot of conversations with Langevin after he had become elected, and he had expressed an interest in having me come in with the business experience that I have, recognizing that wasn't an area of expertise that he had. So I really came in as the business manager. So that's a county position. It's not a sheriff's department position. Like, I think you heard testimony on that earlier today, that's a county position. So I came in under that role. It was kind of a win-win for me because I could also maintain my certification as a police officer, and I could help out on weekends or whenever that was necessary. So I could still continue to do that law enforcement piece. But my primary function was that of a bookkeeper at that particular time. It changed very quickly and my role modified very quickly thereafter, but that's how it started.
Well, you anticipated my next question, which was if you could give me a sense as to your duties when you were first hired as the bookkeeper for the department. And then did those duties change as time went on?
So the bookkeeper function, so managing the money, managing accounts payable, incoming money, outgoing money, things like that, that had maintained throughout that period of time. My role expanded. So in the way that the office had historically been structured, again, prior to me, and I'm not sure the reasons behind it, but most offices have a chief deputy, and that chief deputy can be a lieutenant, it can be a captain. Nothing says it has to be a rank either, but it's just kind of that role that's fulfilled as the number 2 in that office. So quickly after I became the bookkeeper, Sheriff Langevin promoted me to the rank of lieutenant. So I'm not exactly sure when that was. It was within 6 months, I would think. And so maybe a little bit longer. I don't exactly have that time frame. So then I was functioning as that number two for the office, plus doing the bookkeeping. So I fulfilled two separate roles. They got merged into one, and I'd handled both of those for a majority of my time. As we expanded and took on St. Albans Town, for example, I was then promoted to captain and still did all of the captain things. So that's basically everything that Sheriff Langevin didn't do, I did. So patrol, schedule, personnel management, recruiting, and there's a lot of functions that I have in that office.
Well, let's maybe take a step back. I think it would be helpful. And you alluded to this, that it was a county, the bookkeeper function, aside from the chief deputy function that you ultimately took on, the bookkeeper function is a county function.
Right.
And as I understand that means that under law, the Franklin County pays the compensation for the Franklin County Sheriff's Department's bookkeeper. Is that correct?
That position, correct.
As I also understand it, historically in Franklin County, the Sheriff's Department has supplemented the compensation for that position in order to make sure the department got a qualified person.
That's correct. In both the secretary position and the bookkeeper's position, those had happened historically. Yep, there was additional compensation that came from the sheriff. So we got two paychecks. I got two paychecks, if you will.
So I want to ask you about that. So what was do you recall roughly what your compensation was when you were hired from the county?
I don't remember. I don't know.
Calculated on an hourly basis, though?
Yes, I believe it was. Again, I don't have it specifically. It's been a long time, but.
And so you would receive one paycheck from the county, and then you would receive a second paycheck to supplement your compensation for your role as bookkeeper from the department. Is that right?
That's correct.
And was it Chris Goulette who you primarily worked with at the county?
He was he was at that time the county's accountant, as I understand. Yes.
And did your paycheck actually come from the county?
I believe it did. Yeah, it said from Franklin County. Yeah.
But then you had a sheriff's department paycheck as well.
Correct.
And for that second line of compensation, was that also broken down by the hour?
It was broken down by the hour. Yeah. That role that I had was more of a salaried position. So it was usually that 40-hour week, unless I did other things. So in my role, if I filled the shift, if there was a vacancy on a Saturday, then I would be a patrol deputy on Saturday, and I would get compensation from the sheriff's department based on those hours that I worked.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you about that because one area that I wanted to ask you for some clarity on is overtime.
Yep.
And how overtime was compensated. But before we move on to that, I just want to make sure I understand, because it is a slightly confusing situation where you have, as the bookkeeper, and I have here with me, I don't know that we need to look at it, the actual, role document from the Franklin County that defines the role as the bookkeeper. It was one job with two compensation streams. Do I have that correct? When you started?
Correct, it was. Yep. So the person that held that position before me coming in.
Yep.
Exactly. Had a paycheck from the county and a paycheck from the office.
And both the county paycheck and the department paycheck, both were calculated. They're sometimes referred to as salaries in some of the documents I've looked at, but they were calculated at an hourly rate, correct?
Correct. I believe that that's the case. I'm not sure about the previous arrangements with before I became the bookkeeper. I'm not sure what that.
Yeah, no, I'm asking you about you in 2019 when you.
Correct. So hourly. Yeah. So hourly. Yep.
So you would get, let's say, and I'm making this number up, $20 an hour from the county, and you would get $25 an hour from the department.
Correct. Something of that nature. Yep.
Two separate paychecks.
Separate paychecks.
And did you receive compensated sick time? And if you did, was that divided by the county and by the department?
I don't remember taking any sick time, but yeah, or vacation time. Yeah. So that was right. So I would have, if the county gave me 40 hours of vacation time at $10 an hour, and the office would give me 40 hours of vacation time at $10 an hour.
Okay. So your understanding was you received that benefit, if you want to call it that. I don't think it's a fair thing to call it that. Yeah. From both of your quote unquote employers.
Correct.
And in terms of, so vacation time, sick time, compensated time off, both streams, right? But you received it from both?
Correct.
entities.
If I took a vacation day, then right, I would get my $10 an hour based on my vacation allowance from the county, and then 10 from the sheriff's office based on that agreement.
But you were a full-time employee with just one full-time job, a 40-hour-a-week job as bookkeeper.
I had a 40-hour-week job. Yeah, but as I described earlier, it wasn't just to be bookkeeper, it was to start, but I grew pretty quickly into quite a diverse and expansive role.
And during this time, you were a certified law enforcement officer, so you also did law enforcement functions as a regular deputy.
Correct. Yep. When needed. Yep.
Yep. And like I said, I have some questions about that.
Sure.
But in terms of your compensation by the hour from the department as opposed to the county, where would I look to find out? Was that a written contract between you and Sheriff Langevin?
No, nothing written. No.
Okay. Did you agree on an hourly wage orally?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so it was an oral agreement rather than a written agreement in terms of an hourly wage.
Correct.
But the sheriff approved it.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. You mentioned to me, but I intended to mention to you that this issue of overtime. So you receive, two paychecks for a 140-hour-a-week job as bookkeeper for the Franklin County Sheriff's Department. But you also, from time to time, as needed, worked as a deputy on the road or at dairy days or what have you. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And did you receive overtime compensation for that?
I did.
All right. What was the overtime during the 2019 through 2022 period where you were the bookkeeper? What was the department's policy on overtime?
It would have been the same policy that you're compensated at 1.5 times your regular rate of pay.
And were there any exceptions to when you got above 1.5 times your regular hourly rate?
Well, define that my regular hourly rate. What are you considering my hourly rate?
Well, I'm going to get to the question of what your regularly hourly rate was, but leave that aside for a second. Were there instances in which a deputy might get 2 times or 2.5 times?
Yeah, so by policy, a holiday. So somebody working Christmas will get 2.5 times the hourly rate. That's defined by policy.
And how, just mechanically speaking, how was overtime tracked? And I'm talking generally through the office, and then I want to ask for you specifically. How was it tracked? How was it calculated in the books and records, and who was responsible for it?
So that's all done through, we morphed into it used to be a pen and paper or pencil and paper kind of method where folks would write down the hours that they worked. And then based on how the policy is, overtime kicks in at a certain hourly rate. So for example, I think I'm going back to when it was, things have changed since then, but for patrol, it was anything at the 84th hour would be considered an overtime, unless you did a specific detail. So folks that would come in and do traffic detail might get compensated at a different level as we try to incentivize people to do those details. So it really fluctuated, but people would put in their overtime. There's an approval process, then it would flow in to QuickBooks. I think your testimony, that's kind of the universal system that all sheriffs use. So it would be calculated in QuickBooks. So you would establish whatever those pay rates were. And then if you put it in as an overtime flag, it would then calculate automatically what that overtime rate is.
And were the baseline rates upon which the overtime rate was calculated, were those entered mechanically? Did a person do those?
So those are all entered in by person, yes.
And were you that person?
I was that person that put those rates in, correct.
When you were the bookkeeper?
Correct.
Okay. And how were those rates established?
So again, based on whatever compensation rate somebody had. So if somebody's getting $10 an hour, their overtime rate would be 1.5 times that.
Yeah, but who decided whether they got $10 an hour?
The sheriff and I would review all pay for everybody.
And was that committed to writing in some?
Yeah, it was. Yep. So every payroll that went out was signed by both myself and the sheriff.
So we've been talking generally, but let's talk specifically with respect to you, because you have this unique role where, as I understand it, the bookkeeper that preceded you and the bookkeeper that succeeded you were not also law enforcement professionals. In other words, their role was just the bookkeeper.
Correct.
But you were different.
I was different.
You also went out on patrol or went out to the parade or what have you,
Sure.
civil service, whatever it was. How did you specifically record your hours?
So it was tracked the same way. So if I worked for Fairfax as an example, it would show under Fairfax and the hours that I worked.
When you say it would show under,
So we would put that in the time tracking system that I described previously. We would go in and say, I've worked X amount of hours for what town, and it's categorized that way so that Fairfax would show this hours, town would show this hours, that kind of a thing.
So you were responsible for entering your own hours,
Every deputy there is responsible for entering their own hours into that system.
and you as the bookkeeper would review the other deputies' hours?
I would review those hours as well with the sheriff. Sheriff and I would do that.
Who would review your hours?
The sheriff would.
Sheriff Langevin?
Sheriff Langevin would. Yep.
And how would you delineate between hours 1 through 40 that you worked as a bookkeeper and hours 41 through 45 that you were out on parole? Patrol, right?
Yeah, so they would be, again, categorized the same way in that system. So we had a category that was, it said like maybe admin time. And that would be the flag that would say, okay, that was my $10 an hour from the office to supplement my income from the county. And then if I worked a different detail, it would show that detail and the amount of hours that I worked there.
And how was your overtime rate calculated?
So if I had $10 from the county and $10 from the office, I based it on that combined. Yep. So when the sheriff and I discussed what was a fair and reasonable rate, it was that 20. So that turned into $30 an hour. So it was this.
I'm sorry, that turned into.
If I had 10 from the county, if my regular pay rate for my job was $10 from the county and it was $10 from the office, then my overtime rate for patrol work would be based on that number, on that $20 an hour.
So you'd combine your hourly rate from the county with your hourly rate from the department and use that as your base rate to do the 1.5.
That's correct.
Let me take a step back. During your couple years as the bookkeeper, did you receive outside professional help?
I'm not sure what that means.
An accountant or a lawyer?
Did the office receive?
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. We partnered with an outside accounting firm. Yes.
What was that accounting firm?
Cattell, Brannigan and Sargent.
And just generally, what kinds of things did you go to for that accounting firm?
Whether day-to-day questions, how to manage certain accounting principles. There's lots of questions. We would bring them in and do audits as well. So they would kind of go through the books and help us understand where, monies might have been put in one category, but should be in another category. So, general day-to-day guidance or routine guidance.
Can you think of any specific examples?
I can't.
How about other sheriff's departments? Because when you started as the bookkeeper, you had never been the bookkeeper of a sheriff's department.
Correct.
Did you go to other sheriff's departments?
We were fortunate. We had the previous bookkeeper was very open to supporting us. So I would ask her a lot of questions about different things. So she was good at that transition piece. I don't recall asking any specific questions I'm sure we did. We get great support from different sheriff's offices when there's a new transition. So I can't think of anything specifically that we would have asked or that I would have asked.
How about the Department of Sheriffs, State's Attorneys and Sheriffs? Did you go to them for support too?
Back then, no, I did not personally know.
So you mentioned the previous bookkeeper, but she never was faced with this question of how to calculate an overtime rate for someone who was going out on parole because she wasn't doing that, correct?
I'm not sure how she calculated her overtime rate. So if she worked as the bookkeeper for more than 40 hours,
Yep.
I'm not sure how she would have calculated that.
You don't remember discussing that with her?
I never discussed that with her.
How about with the outside accounting firm?
Did I ever discuss the overtime rates with her? No, never
the
discussed
outside
that. I don't
accounting
remember doing that. No.
Or any of the other sheriff's offices that you would work with?
I didn't personally have a conversation with them. No.
So who decided that this was the appropriate way to calculate your overtime rate?
The sheriff.
Sheriff Langevin
That's
did.
correct.
And was that documented in any way?
As I stated before, he'd sign off on every payroll that took place. So he was fully aware of what those rates were. And yeah, we had a lot of conversations about it, about what would make an attractive and appropriate compensation for the roles that I had. As I told you, I took on 2 different positions, combined them. So we had a lot of conversations around what that rate should be, and he approved all of that.
And maybe now would be a good time for me to take a step back and just ask you about sort of the general protocols that you had with Sheriff Langevin for sort of reviewing bookkeeping issues with the department. How did that work?
We would have daily conversations about all the monies that came and went in that office.
Daily conversations, was there a formal mechanism? Was there?
Yep, there's two distinct processes that we had is that, so in terms of payroll, we print out the payroll sheet of who's getting what, if you will, right? So who's getting what their dollar amount paycheck would look like. I would sign off on that. He would sign off on that. He would have the ability to an opportunity to review everybody's pay, and we'd have a conversation about it. So he would ask me questions about why is so-and-so's rate so high? And so we would have a conversation about that as well. So
And Sheriff, when you say sign off on it, do you mean that in a colloquial sense, or do you mean like literally?
literally sign, like there's a document that has his signature on it and my signature on it
And where would that have been preserved?
within the office.
Okay.
Yep. So there was, I believe that there was paper copies of everything, and also we would scan all of those copies in.
And these would be like QuickBook printouts?
They would be quick pronounced. Yep. Yep.
I'm gonna, seems like a good time for me to show you an exhibit. Maybe this will help our discussion. An extra copy for Mr. Kaplan as well. So Sheriff, I don't want to rush you. I want to give you a chance to take a look at this. Have you had a chance to look at it?
Sure.
This to me looks like a QuickBook printout that goes through some of your regular rates and your overtime rates from the period of January 2020 through December 2022. Is that a rough summary of what this document is?
That's what it appears to be. I mean, I didn't produce this document myself, so I don't know if the validity of it, but certainly that's what it looks like.
Yeah, no, I understand. But does it at least look similar to the documents that you used to work with when you were?
This particular printout does not. This isn't something that I was familiar with or that we use on a regular basis.
It's not a version that you would have worked
Correct.
with?
It's not one that we would have, nor is it one that we would have signed off on.
If you look in that far column, well, between the far two columns on the right there, between where it says previous rate and current rate, there's handwritten notes. Do you recognize that handwriting?
I don't.
It's not your handwriting? So curious, and perhaps you've alluded to this, but we don't have to go through, thankfully, every single number on this page, but I do want to unpack at least, a couple of these. And you may have alluded to the explanation already, but for example, if we look at the second one from the top, the paycheck date of July 14th of 2022, that's near the end of your time as the bookkeeper and deputy, correct?
I'm not sure. I don't know what those rates were.
Okay.
Off my head. Yep.
But it looks like it says that your regular time is $23 an hour. And then
Looking at hourly vacation?
so if you, no, I apologize. So if we go down to the second entry from the top,
Okay.
it's pay period of June 27th, 2022 through July 10th of 2022. And then if you follow that row, one column over, it's the paycheck date of July 14th, 2022.
Okay. Where it goes 23 on the left and 26 on the right? Is that the one that you're looking at?
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at. So you with me?
I'm with you.
Yeah, so it looks like your previous regular hourly rate is $23 an hour. Am I understanding that correctly?
It's what it says here, yes.
Yep.
I'm not sure what those actual numbers were, but that's what it says. Yep.
Yeah, and then if we go down one row, it says your overtime rate is $63.42 an hour.
What it says here.
Yep. And do you know how that number was calculated?
I'd have to do the math on it and go back and look at the transactional records and the history of it. I'm not sure how that was calculated.
It's certainly just regular, never ask a lawyer to do math, right? But it's certainly $23, 1.5 times 23 is not 63.42.
So what maybe offer this for you. So you're looking at a transitory time frame. So this is about the time when people would get raises. Okay, so this June to July timeframe, historically raises happen July 1st to be in line with our fiscal cycle. So that could have been, again, that number, I'm not sure that could have been if that pay period transcended that change. So like, that's why you might see on the left-hand side, it says 23 and on the right side, 26. So that could have been a $3 raise that was incurred there. Again, I don't have all of the facts, so I can't give you anything more than that, but that's certainly a possibility given that time frame. I'm not sure.
Okay. But if we look at, even if we look at some other entries, so if we went down, to almost the bottom, let's say, February 24th, 2020 through March 8th, 2020, paycheck date, March 12th, 2020. It looks like your regular hourly rate as recorded there was $16 an hour. But your overtime rate was $49.50.
Right. I don't want to try to answer a question that I don't have an opportunity to really understand all of them. And you're getting into some finite math about timeframes and dollars. I'm happy to do some research and get back to you with a more comprehensive answer. I'm not really sure about when those timeframes changed or what the different rates were or how they were calculated. Again, this isn't a form that I've ever used or familiar with at all.
Okay. So you don't understand why the number for your overtime rate was so much larger than 1.5 throughout this document, was so much larger than 1.5 times your hourly rate.
So
as you sit here today, you don't understand.
Well, let me offer you this.
Yeah.
As we described before, if I had $10 an hour from the county and $10 an hour from the office as the bookkeeper, what Sheriff Langevin and I discussed was, okay, so my regular rate for patrol would then be $20 an hour to make it a fair compensation based on the totality of my role and responsibility there. So that overtime rate, that $20 an hour would have then been time and a half for any of those overtime needs that I had beyond the bookkeeper. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, at least to the extent I understand what you're saying. Are you suggesting that one possibility for the numbers on this sheet is that the regular time rate reflected here was not the totality of what you understood to be your regular time rate?
Again, I'd have to go back in and look at the data.
But is that what you're suggesting is a possibility?
It's possible. It's certainly possible that those two rates were different. But again, based on the timing and how those rates were calculated and what number came from the county versus what number came from the office, I'd have to do some research and get back to you with a more comprehensive answer.
Okay. But you're clear then, your testimony, I think, has been quite clear that you had an explicit conversation with Sheriff Langevin, and Sheriff Langevin both understood and approved that in order to calculate your overtime rate, you were to take both your hourly rate that you were paid from the county and add it to the hourly rate that you were paid from the department.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
He understood that and approved it.
Absolutely. Yep. And signed off on every paycheck that came through, as well as, you asked me this before, that the other mechanism, we didn't get to the other mechanism. The other mechanism was the monthly reconciliations. So the monthly reconciliation, you're probably very familiar with, but it's a very comprehensive account of every penny that comes in, every penny that goes out, every check that's written and all of that. So every single month, that was also reviewed and approved by Langevin and signed off on in hard copy form as well.
And those hard copy documents would reflect both your regular rate and your complete overtime rate?
I'm assuming that there were, again, I'm not looking at one, so I don't remember all of the specifics that were to be contained in there, but certainly every record that it pertains to payroll, the question that you had,
would have your regular hourly rate and your correct overtime rate.
I'm not sure if it's broken down to that detail, but I'd have to look at one. I haven't seen one in months and months and months, so I don't remember what there is. That's a 50, 60-page document.
But Sheriff Langevin, as best as you can recall, would have been able to see by reviewing those documents that you were receiving overtime in the range of $60+ an hour.
He absolutely knew that.
Okay. Let's shift gears, and I have some questions about retirement and the retirement system. So let's start at the beginning. You're hired in 2019, and we talked about your compensation mechanism. What was your understanding upon hiring of whether or how you would be involved in any sort of retirement program?
Right. So as a county employee, my understanding was those county funds were allocated toward whatever percentage at the time were allocated towards that state retirement plan.
So because you were a full-time, you were a 40-hour-a-week county employee,
Yep.
you were registered in the state employee retirement system. Perhaps registered isn't the right word, but you were enrolled.
Yep, correct.
And when you would see your paycheck information or from the county, it would reflect the withholdings for your employee contribution to the retirement system and the employer portion of that?
Correct.
So that's sort of the county half of your compensation. Let's move to the department half. What was the department half?
So originally it was set up based on whatever those percentages were. Those similar percentages would have been consistent.
So you were in the paycheck, the compensation documents that you were getting from the department. You were also having the employer portion withheld and the employee portion withheld.
Correct.
So you were fully in the state employee retirement system.
Correct.
Now,
Again, as a county employee.
as a county employee, but also having the money withheld from your department compensation.
Correct.
So both halves of your compensation.
Correct. It was similar.
Yep. Okay. Did there come a point when you had a discussion with Sheriff Langevin about withdrawing from the state employee retirement system?
We had a number of conversations about the system as a whole. Absolutely.
Can you tell us in as much detail as you can recall what those conversations consisted of?
Absolutely. So it was about the time that it became very public that the state's retirement system was drastically underfunded. And there were a lot of concerns around people like myself, but certainly other members in this retirement program of not having a retirement plan. You know, there was millions and millions and millions of dollars they were underfunded. So as we started talking about how could we ensure a better program for our personnel, we started looking at that. I had made a number of inquiries to the person that was in charge of the facilitator of the state retirement system about how can we handle this? And one of the challenges that we had is that, and I don't remember the percentages specifically, but there was a point in time that we went from a manageable number to a very, very high employer contribution rate. The employee contribution rate stayed pretty much the same, if I recall, but the amount of money that the office would have been required to commit was substantial. So we had a lot of conversations around, you know, some different opportunities. I was investigating different 401k options as a viable alternative to the state plan. Yep.
And when you say we, you, Sheriff Langevin, anybody else participate?
Sheriff Langevin and I primarily.
Okay. And I asked you a series of questions before about, you know, other support systems that you relied on, the outside accountant, the department, other sheriff's departments. Did you have conversations with any of those entities that you recall?
We didn't, but we consulted with our office attorney as well. Had a lot of conversations with the office's attorney about what that process should look like or could look like, and got guidance based on that.
I don't want to ask you questions about discussions with your counsel or with the department's counsel. And you were exploring essentially withdrawing the department from the employee retirement system.
As one of the options.
As one of the options.
Yep.
What came of that, Sheriff?
I left before we got to see it any further. Yep. So at the time that I had left, we were having some dialogue with 401k providers.
Okay. Did you learn anything during your time as bookkeeper about whether or not this was sort of withdrawal was a viable alternative?
Pulling out of the program altogether?
Yeah.
We didn't really get that far. It seemed like certainly a possibility, but there was a tremendous amount of resistance.
Okay. I have an email that might help refresh your recollection. Do you remember around when the timing of this was? Before I get to this email, do you recall there being a problem with when you were first hired about whether or not there were contributions being made to your employee retirement system that had to be sort of corrected?
I don't remember that at all. Not familiar with that.
So I'm going to hand you, it got marked here as Exhibit 18. And like before, I have some extra copies. You had a chance to take a look at it? Is this what we were talking about before? This conversation that you were having, this dialogue that you were having, this email reflect that?
It looks like part of that conversation.
Yeah. So the first email is from you to, it looks like sort of a group email for the state retirement division, dated July 7th of 2022.
What it says here, yeah.
Yep.
I don't remember what that retirement division email was, but
Well, do you remember writing this email?
I don't remember it specifically, no.
Any reason to think that this isn't an email from you?
I'm sorry, is there any reason to?
Yeah, do you have any reason to believe that this isn't an email that you sent?
It looks like it has my name on it. I'd have to familiarize myself with the timing of this. It's been quite a while, but.
Yep. Well, I thought you said that you remember these conversations sort of going on right before the time when you left the sheriff's department.
There was quite a long period of time. But I don't remember specifically what that time frame was.
Looks like this is an email from you to the state inquiring about what we were just discussing, which is withdrawing from the state employee retirement system. Is that correct?
That's what it looks like, yes.
And it looks like Tim Duggan, do you recall that name?
I don't.
Writes back, and he writes a day after, on July 8th of 2022, he writes you with some other folks, CC'd, saying, "Hello, Captain Grismore. As I have previously indicated, there is no process to terminate participation in VSERS, which is the acronym for the State Employee Retirement System,
Right, yep.
Under existing state law." And then he goes on to say that this has been a topic of discussion in the legislature. Did I summarize that correctly?
You did?
Does this refresh your recollection on these conversations?
It does a little bit. Yeah, again, there was a lot of conversations.
Yeah.
Over quite a period of time, but.
Do you remember understanding that it wasn't possible to withdraw from the state employee retirement system?
I got conflicting opinions on whether it was possible or not possible.
Tell me about that.
You said you didn't want to hear information from legal counsel.
I didn't. So I don't mean to ask questions about legal counsel. Aside from your conversations with counsel, was there any other, because this email doesn't seem to be too conflicted.
No, so just my memory of that is that we were learning what that could look like.
Withdrawal from the state
Correct.
employee.
As an option. We wanted to understand what that process could look like.
And what was Sheriff Longevin's role in this dialogue?
He was a participant to all of these conversations. That's why he's CC'd on this email.
And were any decisions made before you left the office?
No. Not in terms of withdrawing the entire organization, no.
At any point, did you make any changes to your own retirement system or your own retirement contribution mechanism?
Yes. So Sheriff Longman and I, when we were exploring the opportunity of a 401k, had a lot of conversations around my particular compensation and how that could look or should look. So again, going back to this very unique dual role that I had, and had historically had, was that, let's just pretend it's that $10 an hour. That $10 an hour was calculated based on that state retirement percentage, and that was contributed towards that plan. So as we had conversations around what could it, should it look like, he and I had dialogue around, my particular retirement and how my portion, the $10 that I got from the county, what to do with that money? How could that money be leveraged or used or positioned, if you will?
I may have misunderstood your previous testimony. I understood you to say that both your compensation from the county and your compensation from the department were both being subject to the withholdings and contributions of the employer, the retirement system.
So in practice, but not through definition of requirement. So compensation that I had received from the sheriff's office was not required to be put into the VEMR's system. The compensation I got from the county was required to go into that VEMR system.
Okay, and can you explain to me how you came to that conclusion?
Through conversations with the sheriff.
So
as an example, let me give you an example. So if the sheriff at that point in time worked another detail, so he would get his money from the state, that state income would be, cut up in the percentages required, and that portion would go to his state retirement. Any money that he made from doing details, which he did, that would not go into the state retirement plan. He didn't calculate those monies separately. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure. It does to me. But let me say it back to you and we'll see if we can move forward. I think I understand you to have explained that you were required, like all full-time employees, as I understand it, to participate in the state employee retirement system as in your role as a county employee. And that as such, you had a certain percentage of your income withheld as your employee contribution, and your employer contributed a certain percentage of your compensation.
From the county side.
From the county side.
That's correct.
And then I think I understood you to say that you followed that same course with your paychecks from the department, but you didn't believe you were obligated to do so.
Correct.
And I also think I understood you to say that your source for that understanding was Sheriff Langevin.
Yes, so through practice and through many conversations that we had about that. Yep, and again, from legal counsel.
Setting legal counsel aside, the accounting firm that you worked with, anybody else weigh in on this?
I don't recall specifically.
Okay.
I mean, they could have, I just don't remember specifically.
Did there come a point in time when you changed how you handled your retirement mechanism, or your retirement contribution mechanism with respect to the compensation that you received from the department?
From the office itself, yes.
Okay, tell us about that.
Again, through conversations about that secondary income. So the $10 an hour that I got from the sheriff's office. So as the sheriff at that time, Langevin, and I were having conversations about 401k plans and all of this kind of stuff, I had brought up the question to him, okay, so if my $10 an hour from the county is set aside in this state retirement program, do I have to take the $10 an hour that I have and apply that to the same system as well? Because it's technically a second revenue stream. It's a second level of income. So we had conversations about that. And again, in conversations with legal, it was determined that that was not required to happen. So what Langevin and I did as a test method was to allow me to have that compensation separately and put that into a separate retirement program. So both as a compensation mechanism, but also as a test mechanism for, is this going to be a viable alternative to the state's program if we were to get that far?
And so did that actually happen?
It did happen.
Okay. Let me show you what we have marked as Exhibit 1, which is a series of documents. Everything actually? No. Sorry. I hold that. So Exhibit 1, Sheriff, is a 4-page document. I'm going to give you a minute to look at it.
Okay.
Not want to rush you. I'm looking at you, Sheriff. You look like you're ready, but your attorney doesn't look quite as ready.
You don't have to wait for me.
Okay, I won't. So the first page of Exhibit 1, Sheriff, looks like a check, a Franklin County Sheriff's Office check, dated December 1st of 2021, paying out to you, in the amount of $4,744.02. And it looks like, you signed it. And it looks like it was deposited if you look at the second page. Did I summarize that correctly?
That's what I see.
Yep. And let me ask you a question I should have asked you earlier. We talked a little bit about your practices and procedures of reviewing documents with Sheriff Langevin. Did you guys have a practice, protocol, procedure in place for check writing authority?
We did.
Okay. Can you tell us about that?
Again, as I stated, I would write the checks. He and I would review everything and he would sign off on the monthly reconciliation as a check and balance of what checks were issued.
Okay. So it was the reconciliation was what received his initials or his signature?
Correct.
And that reconciliation showed check number, amount payable, to whom it was made out to, those kinds of details?
I believe so. Again, it's been a long time since I've looked at one of those documents, but yes. It would actually have a copy of the check and everything, yeah.
But you didn't have a policy in place that required two signatories on a check?
We did not.
Is that a better practice?
I'm not sure.
It's not something that ever came up with your outside accountants?
I don't remember it to have come up or not.
If we go to the third page of Exhibit 1, this looks to me like a Franklin County Sheriff's Office payroll summary, July through September of 2021, so that quarter. For you, is that an accurate description of this document?
So I don't want to try to answer a question I'm not prepared to answer. I'm happy to take this information back though and have a chance to review this and understand it.
Yep.
And happy to come back in and be questioned on.
Well, we might get there. The first question, the question that's on the table is just, is that what this looks like?
Again, I'd have to go back in and understand it. It's been a long time since I've looked at the payroll summary, but again, I'm happy to do that. I just want to have an opportunity to be able to answer your question intelligently.
Okay, so you can't tell right now whether this is a payroll summary from the Franklin County Sheriff's?
Says payroll summary, Franklin County Sheriff's Office on it.
Does it look like the documents that you used to look at?
I don't remember specifically, no.
The handwriting, there's handwriting on the right-hand side. Actually, it looks to me anyway, and I'm no handwriting expert, but it looks like there's two different sets of handwriting on the right-hand side. Let's deal with the numbers first. Do you recognize that handwriting?
I do.
Is it yours?
Looks like mine, yep.
Okay. And then as we move down below your handwriting, there's the date, December 1st, 2021, and it looks like Roger Langevin's signature. Does that appear to be his signature?
What it looks like, yep. Been a long time since I've seen his signature, but yeah, it certainly looks like that.
Okay. And it looks to me, and I understand your statement that you need to look at this document further and review it, but it looks to me like on the right-hand side, what has been done is that, and we can look at the next page too, which might help us with this. It looks like somebody pulled out your total gross pay and multiplied it by a percentage, and then pulled out your employee retirement contribution and combined those two numbers. And if you look at the next page, there's a different set of handwriting that also appears to reflect those same calculations. Does that seem like a fair description to you?
Again, I don't want to answer a question I'm not prepared to answer. So I'm happy to research this and get back to you.
So you don't know the answer to my question?
I don't know the answer to your question.
Do you think that does this refresh your recollection? Does this reflect is this the paperwork? Let me start again. That was a bad question. Is this the paperwork that underlies what you described before, which is your change in your retirement mechanism from your compensation from the department?
Again, I'd have to look. I don't know. It's been a long time since I've looked at this and I haven't been tied to this process for many, many months. So I'd have to go back in and to do a fair job of understanding this, so I could again convey it intelligently.
Do you recall how many times you wrote checks to yourself for retirement contributions?
I don't recall.
More than 10?
I don't remember.
But it happened. It did happen. You did write
Correct.
checks to yourself in the amount that you thought was equivalent to your retirement contributions.
Again, I don't know the numbers. I'd have to have an opportunity to go back in and understand how these calculations were done and refresh my memory on the process and the steps and the timeline. Again, I don't.
I understand that, Sheriff.
I'm not sure what that is.
Yep, and my question is just a little bit different. It's just the numbers aside, the mechanism that I'm describing, and I think we're on the same page because I think you testified to this. At some point while you were the bookkeeper for the Franklin County Sheriff's Department, you decided to not have your Franklin County Sheriff's Department compensation go to the state employee retirement system. And instead you took that money out yourself, correct?
Sheriff Langevin and I had a number of conversations about that. Yes.
You had conversations about it. I got it.
And in practice, he approved everything that took place. Yes.
And again, fair enough on the numbers, but it did happen.
It did happen that we had conversations and he signed off on any of the money movements. Yes.
Okay. So there were money movements.
Correct.
Yes. And you just don't remember how many.
I don't remember. Nope.
And you don't remember the total amount.
I don't.
But the mechanism that I just described, checks from the Franklin County Sheriff's Department went out to you to essentially pay you for your retirement contributions.
I'd have to go back and look at that, but I don't remember specifically all those moving parts, but essentially, yes. Essentially, we had a signature process for that.
Okay.
Yep, for that.
And do you remember roughly how long a period this went on?
I don't.
And do you have a sense as to how much money left the Sheriff's Department in that way?
I don't.
Okay. If I told you it was roughly around $16,000, would that make sense?
Again, I'd have to look. I don't remember. It's been a long time.
Did you ever come to learn that the Franklin County Sheriff's Department had to pay this money back to the state?
I was not aware of that happening.
Is it me telling you right now is the first time you heard of it?
There was some office chatter about it, but I don't have any documentation that showed that that's exactly what happened. I've never seen any documentation that says that happened, so I'm not 100% sure on that.
If that's true, and I'm actually going to show you some documents in a second. If that's true, you would agree with me, I think, that would mean that you were compensated twice for retirement.
Again, I can't give you an answer on that. I have no idea about that. I wasn't the sheriff then. I wasn't even working there then.
You and Sheriff Langevin didn't have any conversation about this?
About the office. So you're suggesting that the office paid back that money to the retirement system?
Yes.
I wasn't there. Never had a conversation with Langevin
Okay.
about that.
And that's the first you're hearing about this right now?
Again, there was some kind of office chatter, but I don't know anything specifically.
Who was the office chatter with?
I don't even remember.
Just give me a minute, Sheriff. I lost the paperclip on this one, but this is Exhibit 21. This is a long one, so I'll give you a minute, Sheriff.
Also,
You're a quicker read than Mr. Kaplan. This is, I think it's a 6 or 7 page string of emails, and it's so often the case, Sheriff, with these, you got to start reading on the last page first, because that's how they come printed out, as I'm sure you know. If we started with that first email, which is on the last page. Look, this is an email from Tim Duggan, who, same person on the email exchange we looked at a few minutes ago. His title here is on the bottom, Director of the Vermont Retirement Systems. And it's from Tim Duggan on January 13th of 2023. So this would have been before you were sworn in as sheriff. So you were not at the sheriff's department when this exchange occurred, correct?
so look, if you wanted me to have the ability to be able to provide factual, intelligent answers to these questions, that information would have been most helpful up front, either sending that to me or to my attorney. I can't give you any specific or reasonable responses to information that I haven't had an opportunity to examine till now. It feels like this is an opportunity to try to sandbag me and to try to manipulate me into answering questions. I haven't had a chance to understand any of these documents or any of the reasons for providing these documents. Again, I'm happy to do that. I just can't give you information that I don't have.
Well, why don't we take it question by question? I mean, I understand what you're saying.
I don't think you do, sir. I don't think you do. Like, you keep asking me the same questions, and I want to be helpful to this, but I have to also have the opportunity to be able to understand what these documents are and have an opportunity to clarify numbers and, who wrote them and the timelines and things like that. And I just haven't been afforded that opportunity.
Well, the question that I have right before you right now, so we got one question before you right now, which is just about the date, right? January 13th of 2023. You had been elected, but you hadn't been sworn in yet. So you weren't at the Franklin County Sheriff's Department, correct?
On January 31st?
13th.
I'm sure.
It's that last one.
Yeah. To answer your question, I was not the sheriff on January 13th. That's correct.
And Tina Plouffe is currently the Franklin County Sheriff's Department bookkeeper.
She is.
Yep. And she was hired after you left, but she stayed on and she still works.
Correct. Yep.
And so this looks like an email exchange between Ms. Plouffe and Mr. Duggan, who has a responsibility in the Vermont employee retirement system. Correct?
That's what it looks like.
Okay. And we can skip like the middle section, but I'll represent to you that this is a lot of back and forth about between the department and the Vermont employee retirement system about unreported income for you that needs to be paid back into the system. And if we end up at the last sort of the first page, which is the last set of emails on January 26th and January 31st, that January 26th email appears to be Ms. Plouffe telling the Vermont employee retirement system that they have paid back $20,000 into your retirement account. Is that, and I know you haven't had a chance to see this document. I understand your objection to that, but is that at least a fair summary of what this document on its face says?
Again, I'd have to have an opportunity to go through this. I'm not sure the validity of the emails, who they were sent to. This is a time frame that I wasn't the sheriff, so I'm not sure about that.
Yep, I understand. Let me read you the email and you can tell me whether or not I've read it correctly. It's from Tina Plouffe to Tim Duggan. There's a couple other people on it. And it says, good morning. I sent the payment of $20,232 last week. The check is dated 1/17/2023. Can you please confirm when you received the payment and apply it to John Grismore's retirement account? Thank you, Tina. Did I read it correctly?
You read it correctly.
Okay. Let's step away from the email, which you haven't had a chance to review, and let me just ask you a broader question. Not asking you to confirm whether these facts are true, but if it is true that the Franklin County Sheriff's Department had to pay money into your retirement account, your state retirement account, equivalent to the money that you withdrew to compensate yourself for retirement savings pursuant to the check we just looked at, you would agree with me that you got doubly compensated, correct?
Again, I don't know. I don't know that you said that in the email, but I'm not sure that they actually paid it. Again, I haven't had a chance to look at this.
Understood,
So I'm-
understood that you
I
don't.
want to help you. I just can't.
Yeah, no,
answer that intelligently.
Yeah, I understand that you don't know what happened, and fair enough, and this is the first you're hearing of it. But if that does turn out to be the case, you would agree, right, that you were doubly compensated?
I don't know that they had to pay it back, so I don't know what the arrangements were made around. I mean, you're saying they paid it back? I'm not sure that they actually paid it back. I'm not sure what the conversations were around paying that back or who said they had to. I'm not sure about any of that.
I understand, but if they did pay it back, it would seem to me anyway, just as a matter of pure logic, that you took that money out for your retirement benefit. And we saw at least one check that showed that. And if the department later had to put that money back into your account, it seems to me, right, that you got doubly compensated.
I don't even know what my retirement looks like. I don't know that money ever came back in. I haven't seen that. I've got no evidence of that.
You said you need time to look into this, and I appreciate that. If it turns out that my supposition is accurate, right, that there was double compensation, do you think it'd be fair for you to have to make some recompense to the department?
I'd have to understand it. Again, I don't know if that money was ever contributed. I've never looked at my retirement program from the state. I just haven't. And so I'm not sure if that money came in, how it came in, how that was calculated. I just don't have that information, unfortunately.
So maybe so, maybe not.
Maybe not.
Thanks, Sheriff. I appreciate it.
So we have.
I'm sorry, do you want these exhibits back?
Yes.
So we have maybe about 10 minutes more of questions. Want to just proceed with that, or do you need a break first, or?
Let's go forward.
So I'm going to turn it over to Representative McCarthy for a few additional questions.
So Sheriff Grismore, thanks for being here today. I've got just a few questions related to the public trust and the impacts that the proceedings, the Criminal Justice Council's decertification vote has had on your office and the ability for the Franklin County Sheriff's Office to continue to serve the county. So you've been called on to resign by community leaders from both major parties and in editorials, including at least one that was written recently by the editor of the St. Albans Messenger. Have you considered resigning from office? And if so, if not, why not?
I have not. Yep, I'm accountable to the people that voted me into the office, not accountable to the political system. I'm not accountable to our Criminal Justice Training Council thinks that is right or not right. I'm accountable to the people that voted me in, and I intend to uphold that honor and that trust that they put in me and continue to put it.
Do you believe it's important for a sheriff to be able to assist deputies in policing duties?
It's a pretty broad question. You want to sharpen that for me?
Well, if I understand from your testimony and from what I've come to understand in this process, you won't be able to, for instance, respond to patrol or assist in an investigation, assuming that the decertification actually moves forward. So is that an important part of being a sheriff, to be able to do policing duties?
No, it's not.
And do you think it's fair to the voters of Franklin County to be paying for and having their sheriff's office run by somebody who can't perform those duties?
The Constitution feels that that's appropriate.
You've maintained the appropriateness of your use of force during the incident with Jeremy Burroughs last year, and that's in the face of expert testimony and the Vermont Criminal Justice Council's vote. Have you considered just apologizing for that and seeking some sort of restorative path, like retraining or something that would be an alternative course?
I've never thought about that. Nope. I believe what I did was justified and warranted under the circumstances.
This morning, the Vermont Sheriff's Association called on you to resign. And they cited three concerns, I believe: public trust, lack of leadership, and concerns about ethics. Do you have any response to their concerns as your fellow law enforcement leaders?
So elected officials from other counties have a better read on the ways and means of Franklin County other than the residents themselves. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. I won by a substantial margin. This was after all of this came out. None of this is new when it came time for election. People had a choice. They could have voted differently. They voted for me. I'm not concerned with what people outside of Franklin County are worried about or what they have for opinions or what they think they're entitled to. I'm responsible and accountable to the people that voted me into the office, and that's what I intend to do.
Good, good. Any other questions from any other committee members? I don't see any. Thank you very much for spending your part of your afternoon this afternoon, and hopefully the weather's gotten better for everybody's commute back home. So we'll take about 5 minutes break, and we're going to reconvene for a few minutes, and we probably will be going into executive session because we'll be getting some advice from our attorneys primarily, but we will talk a little bit initially in public session. Take about